Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, Des Moines Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Witkoff Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. We're in 2010, and allegedly, because the prior 2 weeks I had all of the local domestic banks saying that they're lending and there's money for commercial real estate. So today, I have the opportunity to have 6 international lenders who will provide us insight in where they look at the market, what they like, what they plan to do, or where they see 2010. My guests today include Gene Barden, who is the head of the U.S. Representative Office for DG Hype, David McNeil, who's the head of the New York Representative Office of Decca Bank, Peter Hannigan, who is the Managing Director in charge of Real Estate Finance for PB Capital, Cliff Rook, who is the Managing Director and Head of North American Operations for Eurohypo, Joe Basile, who is the Managing Director, Head of Real Estate Financing for NordLB, and last but never least, a returnee, Mr. James Merman, the Senior Vice President, Real Estate Financing for Helaba Bank. All of you are international lenders. All of you also happen to be lenders from a certain part of Europe. So, Gene, I think when you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, you said you came into the market the last. It took you a couple of years to open up. So what are you seeing?
David's now last.
Oh, David's last? Okay,
David's
that's
now the newest entrant.
You're the new kid on the block?
But we've been doing deals in the U.S. for approximately 11 years. So new
wait,
old lending platform.
So since you're the new kids on the block, tell me why did you come here from Germany to lend, and what do you want to lend in 2010? Gene, you're first, and David second.
We came here to diversify the income statement for the bank in Germany because it was very domestic centric, so that was really the primary goal. It's a very small bank and it's a very conservative bank. We're very picky, so we do $50 deals per ticket. We like to, and we like to do core assets, core locations, core cash flows, sustainable cash flows, credit. I've done a lot of deals with all
these people over here. Now, David, you've been, Gene said you're the new kid on the block. I mean, but not the new kid in that manner. And you've been involved in some of the major transactions this year. You were involved with the financing of 1515 Broadway. Were you also involved with the New York Times building?
We were not.
But you've been involved in a lot of transactions. Why is Decca Bank so? Why are you active? And what do you like about being in New York City?
We've actually been in the U.S. for about 11 years. Opened a New York office to have local people be able to talk to the customer, structure transactions, take more of a direct lead in transactions rather than be a Frankfurt-based bank trying to buy participations. So I think it allowed us to kind of up our profile in the market. And I think it, we can now do direct transactions. We can talk to customers directly. We can be in California in the day rather than trying to fly from Frankfurt to California if we like a deal there. So I think it gives us more access to the U.S. market is the reason we're here.
Now, what about you? You've been in the market for a number of years. I mean, will you lend everywhere in the U.S., Cliff?
Eurohypo has been actively in the U.S. since really 1998. We were originally a part of the Dresdner Bank. The answer is no, we will not. We will pursue transactions in the 25 major MSAs within the United States, and where there's actually a good client with a good product. We've talked earlier about some of the major mall REITs and some of their properties. We will do those, even though they're not in one of those 25 MSAs. But with respect to going into something I heard somebody say the other day, going into square states, it's probably not where you're going to find a lot of Eurohypo loans.
Mr. Basile?
Yes, sir.
What about you? I mean, you've been around the street a long time.
I spent about 16 years at UBS prior to taking the reins at Nord LB. And like David and of course Gene, Nord LB had been in business for a while, for about 10 years, buying participations, and they brought me on board to start a lead arrange type business, and that's something that we've done because the last $1.7 billion of our exposures have been in connection with lead managed mandates. So that's why Nord LB is here in its current form. Now, as far as what we'll do, I think we're pretty much restricted as far as where our funding will let us go, and because Nord LB is not a hypotheken bank, we have distinct advantages to funding in certain parts of the United States, and as Cliff had mentioned, those are the 24-hour cities, the international type cities.
Now, yeah.
And just to finish my thought, and the reason why we focus on those cities is because we have the fund brief. Our funding costs are significantly less in those towns than they are in, as Cliff says, the square states. But we will do dominant properties outside those 24-hour cities, but it'll just cost us a little more on the funding side.
Here's my question. I know that some of you, perhaps many of you, at one time where I would walk around New York City and I would see the construction sites and I'd see one of your names posted over there as the construction lender on that situation for a new condominium. What's happening today? Would you look at a condominium? Would you look at a new rental in New York City, and then even in Jersey City or Hoboken in a situation? You've had the hell of a name around there, and so has Cliff. Mm-hmm. What about in 2010?
Probably not, though I would say if there was an 80-20 financing that needed to get done with one of our existing clients, we would seriously look at that. We still have our sign on a number of condominium construction projects in the city that we have not been fully repaid off. So I think we'd like to see some of that debt get paid off, and before we make decisions about what we're going to do on new product. But I think a condominium residential construction loan probably just isn't the best use of our capital at this time.
Well, Cliff, you and Peter have been always, I used to see always PB and Eurohypo. I mean, what about today? Are you in any new condominium that you would renew today?
So
not something
ground up construction.
Right.
Ground
up construction, something, a new project, as opposed to something which you may have approved 2 years ago or something like that.
No, Michael, I don't think you'll see any of the foreign lenders in this room to be doing construction loans for a while. I think most of us stopped in 2007. The economic situation in the United States has been very difficult for banks from everywhere. And also the opportunities without CMBS in the market right now, we've been able to do stabilized products. And I think what Jamie said, the best use of our capital is getting it funded at a better margin on less riskier assets. So I don't think you'll be seeing any of us doing construction for quite a while.
When we talk about less riskier assets, there are basically, four food classes, as we could say, apartments being one, retail, office, industrial, and then, the fifth food class being hospitality. How do you lenders look at the different ones? Which ones are you preferred, and which one are the one that you say, no, I'll put away the apple on the floor, I don't want to do it? Joe?
I think whenever I select an asset to finance, the first thing I ask is who is the sponsor, because in the event the asset does get into trouble, the better sponsors typically are more apt to help along and move the process along. As far as the basic food groups are concerned, there are four that I look at, but the two that I really have focused on have been office and retail, because those are two assets that I can get measurable data from both macro and micro, where I can make a pretty smart decision. So between the combination of the sponsorship, as well as what the asset is, where the asset's located, how dominant the asset is, and if the asset is a core asset of the sponsor, not one of these things where they did it in conjunction with the fund or with an advisor who's moving money with a core asset of a major borrower in a major market and particularly those two different assets where I can get data that can pretty much support my decision.
Gene, you're a former chemical banker. What do you want to do here for DG Hype? I mean, what's the assets that you like, and what don't you like, really?
I like assets that do cash flow. I like being able to understand the cash flow, and I like being able to explain the sustainability of the cash flow. So that's probably, I won't even look at a deal if it's somebody that didn't treat us right at Chemical Bank. Cliff has called me and is like, no, won't touch that borrower ever again. I've gone through the workout cycle. There's we were talking about earlier, but if a client comes in and they come in with a lawyer, or they come in with one rule book, you don't want to do business with them, and I don't want to do that. And our bank is young in the U.S. market, so I don't want to really go into how bad things can get when they're ugly. So I really want to keep with good clients, but cash flows that are sustainable, that we can understand, underwrite, and count on for a period of time.
But I think what's important on that is, while there are domestic lenders who are still out there lending, they aren't lending large dollar volumes. They're taking smaller deals. So there is an opportunity for international banks like you to be selective and to get the better borrower, like you did at 1515. Mm-hmm. I mean, S.L. Green is a good read. Simon Properties is somebody. Brookfield, Boston Properties. These are well-capitalized entities. You don't have to take, as one would say, the bottom of the barrel on today's market. Now, if you are dealing with the quality people and you are competing against insurance companies in certain aspects, can you be competitive? Because
I'll take a stab at that.
Sure.
The fact is that the real estate market today is huge, and there's a tremendous amount of refinancings coming up. We all know that the CMBS market remains moribund. There really is limited competition. Having said that, there are very few what I'll call high quality assets that are out there. Now, what sets this group apart is that each of us will write a ticket of $50 to $100 million and be willing to hold it. On the large New York assets where there's a quality sponsor and a quality cash flow and a quality product, we do play together, and we play together nicely, and we are able to finance $300-400 million. On those type of assets, it typically requires somebody with a substantial capital base to begin with, and it also requires somebody who has a substantial organization to manage it. So that fulfills the requirements, and to a certain extent, we are able to compete. The one thing the insurance companies do not have a good rapport with each other about is playing nice in the sandbox. So once an insurance company hits 100 to 125, most of them get a little skittish to begin with, and second, for them to actually team up and do a deal becomes a dance of sumo wrestlers. So it's a very
so that's why I put this little syndicate together, so I could do $1 billion loan, right?
Well, that's going to be an interesting thing, because as some of the larger projects in New York come on for refinancing, the ability to refinance an asset in New York that requires $500 million is going to be a challenge, and it's going to affect the price that asset trades at. Because if you can't get the financing, that obviously affects the total price somebody's willing to put in.
Now, how long are you going to, I mean, do you want a 3-year loan? Do you want a 5-year loan? Do you want a 7-year loan today? What do you feel comfortable with? When I did the show the prior week, you know, they said, most of the local community banks said they like 5, 7 years. They don't want to come out with this potential 3-year problem because they're worried about the interest rates going up. I mean, how do you and how your parent companies in Europe
Great
look
time
at this?
to be a lender. We'd go 10. We'd go 10.
You go 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
We do 3, 5, or 7. I think 10 is something that we're not really willing to take a look at today.
Peter?
I think 3 to 7 is the sweet spot. 10 can be done, but I think 3 to 7 years, 5-year loan to be perfect, I think.
Anyone else?
3, 5, 7, and 10.
Now what about, you know, there's Office. You know, 1515 is an iconic building. You know, people know it. Some of us who are a little older even remember it was called the W.T. Grant Building. McNeil didn't know, he was too young. But, you know, what about buildings, you know, which are Class B buildings, Class B office buildings? You know, how do you look at them because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the electrical, you know, they don't have the do you think those are deals that you can do today? I mean, or is it does the building have to be after 1990 built, or will you look at something that was built in 1927? You know, some of these Lower Manhattan or other buildings.
I think you can have an older Class A building. I mean, look at the Rockefeller Center, for example. I mean, it's not a 1920s building, but it's an older building. But I think in general, the Germans in general don't really like the Class B buildings. I think there's enough Class A out there to keep us all busy. And if an Esso Green has a Class B building and a good story, absolutely we take a look at it.
But
I
now
think in general, Class A building is really all we consider. But it's not. I don't consider it being. If it's a certain age, it couldn't be a Class A building.
Here's a question. You know, you talk about Esso Green and you talk about office buildings. Now, I remember in a number of prior shows, including having Vornado, having Mike Fascitelli on my show, and when I would get to the subject of Lower Manhattan, he said, unfortunately, we own one building that we acquired, but we're never going to go to Lower Manhattan. We don't want to be in Lower Manhattan. How do you see financing of an office building or a residential or anything today in Lower Manhattan? Do you think Europe would be happy to finance something in Lower Manhattan today? Anybody? Joe?
I think so. I'd spend more of my time in Midtown and in the Plaza District and along the 6th Avenue corridor than I would do downtown Manhattan. A number of the buildings down there were taken offline, and as we know, were major residential conversions. And thank the Lord that had happened, because the vacancy rate there would have been extremely high. So the thing is, I think the viability of Lower Manhattan, with the exception of points east towards
Water Street. And then
Water Street, Battery Park City.
More towards Battery Park City, with some of
West
that
side.
new development's going in, but there's going to be a tremendous amount of space delivery there over the next 10 years. So you have to really, really, really be careful. So I think the Wall Street area, that area there, the viability of the asset bases down there aren't as well as they are in other parts. It's less desirable.
I don't want this to be the Mike Stoll myopic show, but would you go into the boroughs? You know, I was born in Brooklyn. Would you do a building in Brooklyn or in Queens or the Bronx? Do you think that, Mr. Hannigan? I know you ride up. You do take the Bronx when you go to the golf course, but
I think any market outside of Midtown Manhattan, we would look more closely at the leases, and I don't think anybody would take tremendous rollover risk in any market. That includes Wall Street, the outer boroughs. It includes New Jersey,
Midtown
Chicago.
Manhattan, too. I mean, a major rollover risk,
major
even in the
roll-
best of markets, is a really tough sell today.
And we're not underwriting $100 rents anymore. I mean, we don't want to be at $800, $1,000 a foot in any market.
right.
So we will clearly look closely at everything.
I mean, a number of years ago, you know, Greenwich was a hedge fund country. Buildings were being traded for $1,200, $1,400 a square foot. I mean, do you think that you would even look at a loan in Stamford, Greenwich, or in? I heard the situation. If it's a UBS or an RBS, fine. But would you look at an office building in a suburban building today?
No, I was going to follow up with what Peter was saying in terms of, whether it's downtown Manhattan, Connecticut, for me, if it's federal government lease, if it's that kind of quality credit, then I have less issue with the location as long as it's a long enough term on that thing, and I really believe there's an exit strategy for us. But to get into multi-tenanted, 50% rollover, for the first 3 to 5 years in those locations, I think that's a tough Midtown Manhattan transaction for Helaba right now, let alone downtown, any of the suburbs, or any other, cities outside of the majors.
I think selfishly, we just don't have to do it today.
Right.
I think there's enough business to attend to for all of us in the major markets, Class A buildings, and that'll change eventually. But I think right now there's a dearth of lenders. There's a lot of product, and I think over time you'll get quality product where you don't need to go to the boroughs. Although I'm sure there's quality product there, just not that interesting to me right now.
What happens to you and to other people when you see certain buildings being traded at, in certain cases, lower than replacement cost? I mean, even the loan that you did at 1515, you couldn't replace that building at $400 a square foot. The land would cost. How do people pick up the Wall Street Journal? They pick up Reuters. All of the press services have this. How do the people over there, and they say, hey, I want to do a loan for $600 a foot, and somebody says, 4 New York Plaza just sold for $97 a foot. This one was financed for $300 a foot. How do you get something like that?
Most of the people we report to are actually fairly sophisticated real estate lenders in their own right. Eurohypo has a $200 billion plus balance sheet. We have $80 billion in real estate around the world. So although we clearly want to stay in the major metropolitan areas, they are able to distinguish between 4 New York Plaza and 1515. They know the differences. They know Midtown versus upper Midtown to lower Midtown to the Plaza District. So there is a good dialogue that takes place. Also because of the fact that we're doing properties not just in New York City, but in Washington, in Los Angeles. We've actually looked at a couple of things in Chicago. You have a very good flow of information back and forth. So we're able to take a more sophisticated view. With respect to like some of the suburban office properties, frankly, it's our belief, my own personal belief, that the banks that are operating up in those areas, People's Bank of Connecticut, for example, they're better suited to make a better evaluation of those local marketplaces and who's going to be operating in those office buildings. So that's why, again, we kind of come back to the character/location issues.
And from a glass half full perspective, if things are trading for less than replacement cost, really puts an inhibitor on new development. So I think, as long as you have growth in a market that's really, things are trading for true, below replacement cost, you have kind of a natural sort of hedge to new supply. So I think, again, that's taking a bullish, view of it and a glass half full, but I think that's another piece of it that, becomes helpful when you're discussing new transactions.
In 2009, at the beginning of the year, one of the worst markets was the hospitality market. Fortunately for New York City, the hospitality market rebounded like in the fourth quarter. Occupancy was up, average daily rate was up, revenue par was up. Would you look at a loan today for a hospitality type of asset? Anyone?
I think we would. I mean, we have hospitality on the balance sheet. We actually, on our equity side of the business, own hotels worldwide. So we like that business, are comfortable with that business. And if you think about today's cash flow, if you can underwrite a hotel on today's numbers and be happy with your debt yield on today's numbers, then at least you feel like we may not be at the bottom, but we're pretty close to the bottom. So you should have an improving asset.
Yeah, hotel is the first thing that'll pop back once the business cycle kicks into gear. So yes, as David said, if you're already underwriting at possibly the worst depressed level against the hotel and you're happy, there's only upside.
Retail, has always been good. Do you believe, malls have been hit bad. I did a show a couple of weeks ago, and a fund manager said to me that he had purchased a shopping center in Houston for $15 a square foot, a 1 million square foot shopping center. This was nothing. How do you, of the favored retail, what's your favorite retail class? Is it a mall? Is it
Fortress Mall?
I think it's still malls, definitely. Mm-hmm. But with strong sales per square foot, I think the fundamental criteria right there is what is the mall selling? as you said, $15 a foot for a purchase price is possible. If your anchors are closed and the mall is doing less than $300 or $200 a foot in sales, it may not survive.
There's a point we brought up earlier, and it relates to fund buyer versus operator. One thing that's shaken out in this marketplace is clearly the fund buyer who went in for financial engineering gain to get some quick pop by virtue of the fact that cap rates went from 7 to 5 and then intended to get bought out or sell out, and now is stuck, versus some of our larger REIT players, Simon Property Group, CBL, Macerich, any of these players who actually has an operating group have frankly come through this crisis relatively well. They've got the good properties, they got the fortress malls, and they got the operation and organization behind it.
And they also have, due to last year, $30 to $40 billion of available cash from IPOs, bond offerings, and other situations. So all of these people are really in a stronger position today than they've been in the past. How much do you think, if I had, because we have a short period of time left, how much do you think you'll lend this year, each one of you?
600 to 800 million. 600 to 800 million.
Well, we're budgeted to do $1 billion. My bet we're going to be less than that. Maybe 600 to 800 million in the
Peter?
U.S.
Our projections are $2 billion this year.
Cliff?
About the same as Peter's.
350 to 500 million.
What are you, the little guy in town?
No, I'm preoccupied with other aspects of the business.
Okay, and Mr. Merman?
We're budgeted at $2 billion also, so I think we might be a little bit less, but that's where our budget is.
So looking at this, I think the positive thing is that my glass is more than half full. Okay, it's not, it's going to reach there, and the apple could be polished. And I think that basically the international lenders, the European lenders like you, if it's a good credit, good character of the situation, good cash flow, with the right type of asset, you're going to be lending. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here. Gene Barden, David McNeil, Peter Hannigan, Cliff Rook, Joe Basile, and last but never least, James Merman. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, Beechwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, Des Moines Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Wickoff Group.